Welcome back, another episode. David and his crew are introduced in The Last of Us Episode 8 as a new group of antagonists for the penultimate episode of the HBO adaptation. The Last of Us Episode 8 picks up the pace in an action-packed episode after Episodes 6 and 7 of the series concentrated on Ellie's attempts to save Joel's life after he was injured. The introduction of David's group and its effects on Joel and Ellie are a major source of action and drama. In the penultimate episode of the HBO adaptation of The Last of Us, David and his gang are introduced as new antagonists to the narrative. The Last of Us Episodes 6 and 7 centered on Ellie's attempts to save Joel's life after he was injured. Episode 8 picks up the pace and is jam-packed with action. When David's group is first introduced and their effects on Joel and Ellie are felt, there is a lot of action and tension. David is a pastor and the head of a church. The 8th episode of The Last of Us introduces David as a preacher chosen to lead a religious group before revealing him and his group as the true antagonists. Although David's supporters aren't explicitly depicted as religious, he later says that they just needed a leader, which God could give them through David. David preaches frequently, and the community common area has a sign that reads, "When we are in need, he shall provide," the first part of which serves as the title of The Last of Us Episode 8, When We Are in Need. Explaining David's Last of Us background, the fact that David wasn't always religious is an intriguing aspect of his past in HBO's The Last of Us, Season 1, Episode 8. David admits that before the epidemic, he was a teacher, despite serving as the community's preacher. He claims to have taught math to kids Ellie's age in the past. While the story of Henry and Sam takes place in Pittsburgh in the source material, David explains that he was initially a part of the quarantine zone that was established in Pittsburgh following the epidemic. David's group is related to the university from The Last of Us Episode 6. According to David, after the Pittsburgh QZ fell, he and a few others departed and began assembling more people. They traveled around a lot before settling in the settlement depicted in the episode, as opposed to remaining in one spot for an extended period of time, which attracted raiders. The revelation that David is connected to the men from the end of Episode 6 of The Last of Us marks the beginning of David's transformation from an initially amiable character to the primary antagonist of Episode 8 of the game. David says that his group's members are responsible for the attack on Joel and Ellie in Colorado, and they are aware that Joel killed the man who stabbed him. Ellie becomes alarmed as a result of her concern that David will exact revenge on her. David claims that once the Pittsburgh QZ was destroyed, he and a few others departed and began to recruit more individuals. Instead of remaining in one spot for an extended period of time, which attracted raids, they traveled around a lot before settling in the town depicted in the episode. Once it is revealed that David has connections to the men from The Last of Us Episode 6's end, David begins to change from an initially friendly character to the main antagonist of The Last of Us Episode 8. According to David, the guys who attacked Joel and Ellie in Colorado were from his organization, and they were aware that Joel had killed the man who had stabbed him. Ellie becomes alarmed by this because she thinks David will punish her. The fact that David and his gang are cannibals may come as the biggest surprise to anyone who hasn't played the first The Last of Us game. Yet, The Last of Us Episode 8 makes it plain that only a small number of residents of the village are aware of this. In a small departure from the first The Last of Us game, the others are kept in the dark and informed that they consume meats like venison or rabbit. Although David's cannibalism is first revealed later in The Last of Us Episode 8, there are some signs earlier. David and his group are cannibals, which may be the most stunning revelation for anyone who hasn't played the first The Last of Us game. However, The Last of Us Episode 8 makes it abundantly clear that only a select few residents of the town are aware of this. In a small departure from the first The Last of Us game, the others are kept in the dark and informed that they consume venison or rabbit meat. The Last of Us, Episode 8, contains the revelation of David's cannibalism, but there were previous signs. As David's cannibalism is revealed when Bella Ramsey's Ellie discovers a human ear on the floor in the final moments of The Last of Us Episode 8, another horrifying truth about his character is revealed. David gives hints about his true character in his interactions with Ellie. He professes to be a kind, benevolent leader. David's veneer starts to crack when he admits that he has a violent heart and that he is obsessed with cordyceps. He claims that he admires its desire to guarantee its future via violence, and that it loves in this way. When David tries to sexually assault Ellie at the end of the episode, this situation gets worse. Ellie retaliates, and he says, "The fighting is the part I like the best." After inappropriately touching Ellie's hands earlier, David claims that she is exceptional after learning about her immunity from The Last of Us. He then declares that he will keep Ellie, treating her like an item rather than a living being. The HBO version of The Last of Us focuses on all of this far more clearly than it did in the original game, making David the genuine antagonist of Episode 8 of The Last of Us. Thanks for watching. For more videos, subscribe our channel.